My name is Evelyn Carter. I have always been the dependable one in my family, the one who gets the call when someone needs help, the one who always steps in no matter what. It's been that way for as long as I can remember. Maybe it's because I grew up in a household where family meant everything. We didn't have much, just enough to keep the lights on and food on the table, but we had each other. And in our world, that was enough. My parents were hardworking people, the kind who never complained, never took a day off unless they were forced to. My mother, a woman of quiet strength, balanced two jobs, one as a waitress at a local diner and another cleaning offices late at night. My father spent his days under the sun, working construction, his hands calloused and rough from years of labor. They rarely had time for themselves, but they made sure we never felt the weight of their struggles more than necessary. Love was expressed through packed lunches, hurried conversations before bedtime, and the unspoken understanding that everything they did was for us. Then there was me, the youngest of four, the one who somehow became the glue holding the family together. My older brothers, Luke and James, were rough around the edges, always getting into trouble, whether it was in school or with kids from the neighborhood. My sister, Olivia, was the dreamer of the family, always lost in her books and poetry, sometimes so deep in her thoughts that she forgot the world around her. And me? I was the problem solver. I learned early how to fix things, not just physical things like a broken radio or a leaky faucet, but people. When James failed his math test, I stayed up late to help him study. When Olivia had her first heartbreak, I sat beside her, listening to her sob until her voice was hoarse. When Luke got into yet another fight, I was the one who patched him up before our parents could find out. I was the one they turned to, the one who smoothed over the rough edges, the one who made things right. And I didn't mind. Not really. In fact, I liked it. I liked knowing that I was needed, that I had a purpose. There was a certain comfort in being the person people relied on, in being the one who could shoulder the burden when others couldn't. It made me feel strong, in control, like I had a role that no one else could fill. But as I grew older, I started to wonder, who was I beyond the dependable one? Who was I when no one needed me to fix anything? It was a question I didn't yet have the courage to answer. When I got older, I carried that with me. The instinct to listen, to help, to make sense of the chaos in people's lives. I went to college, studied psychology, and became a guidance counselor. Every day, I sat across from students navigating the storm of their teenage years, offering them the kind of support I had once wished for myself. I loved it. I thought I was good at it. I believed, truly believed, that helping people was my purpose. Then everything changed. My sister, Claire, lost her husband in an instant. A drunk driver, a head-on collision. A life stolen without warning. One reckless moment that shattered everything. One phone call in the middle of the night that left her breathless and broken. She was left alone to raise her son, Jack, who was just 12, a boy suddenly forced to grow up too fast, to navigate a world where his father was just gone. Claire tried. God, she tried. She put on a brave face, told everyone she was fine, convinced herself that if she kept moving forward, things would get better. But grief is heavy, and she was drowning. I could see it in the way she moved slower, in the way she forgot little things, Jack's school events, groceries, doctor's appointments. It was as if part of her had gone missing, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't find it again. She needed someone to step in. And so did Jack. So I did. Without hesitation. At first, it was just the little things. Picking him up from soccer practice when Claire was too exhausted to leave the house, helping him with his homework, making sure he had what he needed when his mother couldn't. But over time it became more. Much more. I found myself at every game, every school play, every parent-teacher conference. I was the one he called when he was upset, the one who sat beside him in the quiet moments when grief hit hardest, the one who made sure there was dinner on the table, that his birthday was still celebrated, that the world, even in its cruelty, still had room for warmth. I thought I was helping him. I thought I was doing the right thing. But the thing about stepping in is that sometimes you step too far. You cross an invisible line between support and replacement, between helping and taking over. And before you even realize it, you've rewritten the roles in someone else's story. I never wanted to take his father's place. But maybe, in some way, I had. Jack adored his mother. Claire wasn't just a parent to him. She was his safe place, his constant, his guiding light. She cheered him on at every game, her voice always the loudest in the crowd. She stayed up late helping him with school projects, no matter how tired she was from work. When thunderstorms rolled in, she would sit with him on the couch, holding his hand, whispering stories to distract him from the pounding rain against the windows. She understood him in a way no one else ever could. Their bond was unshakable. Or at least, that's what Jack believed. But life doesn't care about bonds, does it? It was a cold autumn night when everything changed. Claire had been working a double shift at the hospital, another long day of caring for others before finally heading home. She was exhausted. The kind of exhaustion that settles deep into your bones. That makes every blink feel heavier than the last. Maybe she was thinking about Jack, eager to get home to him. Maybe she was replaying the events of the day in her mind. Or maybe she was just too tired to see it coming. The truck ran the red light. The impact was instant, unforgiving. Twisted metal, shattered glass. The world that had once been so full of Claire's laughter and warmth was now eerily silent. Jack was 12 years old. I'll never forget the phone call. The shrill ringing sliced through the quiet of the night, pulling me from sleep. My heart pounded as I reached for the phone, already dreading whatever news waited on the other end. It was Curtis, a close family friend. His voice trembled, barely more than a whisper. She didn't make it. 3 words. Just 3 words, and everything fell apart. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My mind refused to accept what he was saying, as if rejecting the truth could somehow change it. But reality was already sinking its claws in, and my thoughts immediately turned to Jack. Jack, who still had his mother's laughter in his ears. Jack, who would wake up expecting to see her face, to hear her voice. Jack, who had no idea that his entire world had just been shattered. How do you tell a child that the person he loves most in the world is never coming back? I sat there in the dark, gripping the phone, trying to find the words. But there were no words, no way to soften the blow. There was only the unbearable truth, waiting to tear through his young heart like a storm with no end in sight. And in that moment, all I could do was cry. When I got to the house, Jack was sitting on the couch, knees pulled to his chest, staring at the front door as if willing her to walk through it. His face was pale, his lips slightly parted, and his hands gripped the fabric of his sleeves so tightly his knuckles had turned white. He didn't cry, not at first. He just sat there, silent, lost in the kind of void that only grief can carve into a person. I hesitated, my own heart pounding, unsure of how to break him further with the truth he already seemed to know. But the words had to be said. She's gone, Jack. For a moment, nothing changed. His chest barely moved, as if he had stopped breathing altogether. Then, all at once, the light in his eyes flickered out, and the boy in front of me shattered. He collapsed into my arms, his body trembling, sobbing so hard I thought he might break apart right there in my grasp. I held him, feeling the weight of his sorrow seep into my bones. His pain was heavy, raw, unfiltered. There was nothing I could say to make it better. No words that could stitch the pieces of his world back together. So I didn't speak. I just held him, letting him grieve in the only way he knew how. From that moment on, I became everything to Jack. His father had been absent for years, a ghost of a man who had long since chosen to be anywhere but here. And now, with Claire gone, Jack had no one. So I stepped in because someone had to. Because he needed me. And I wasn't going to let him down. At first, it was just the basics, making sure he ate, that he had clean clothes, that he had a place to sleep where nightmares wouldn't completely consume him. But grief isn't logical. It doesn't follow a pattern, doesn't come with a manual. It doesn't let you grieve neatly or at an acceptable pace. It wrecks you, twists you into something you don't recognize. And that was what it did to Jack. He stopped talking to his friends. stopped answering texts, stopped caring about the things he used to love. His grades slipped, and soon so did his temper. He lashed out at teachers, at classmates, at himself. He started skipping school, staying out late without saying where he was going. And when he was home, he barely spoke, his silence a wall I couldn't break through. But the worst part was the anger. Not the kind that came in loud outbursts, not the kind that passed quickly. No, this was the slow-burning kind, the kind that settled deep in his bones, turning his grief into something heavy and dark. He was angry at the world, at the driver who had taken his mother from him, at fate for dealing him such a cruel hand. And maybe, just maybe, he was angry at Claire, too, for leaving him, for making him just like his father, abandoned. I tried to reach him. I tried to be enough. But how do you fill the void of someone who has lost everything? The truth is, I didn't know how. But that didn't mean I was going to stop trying. One night, 6 months after Claire's death, he finally broke his silence. It was late, too late for homework, but we had been sitting at the kitchen table for hours, surrounded by half-finished math problems and the empty remains of a dinner neither of us had really eaten. The house was too quiet. It always was these days. Jack gripped his pencil so tightly his knuckles turned white. I watched as he stared down at the numbers in front of him, his expression blank, but his breathing uneven. And then, barely above a whisper, he spoke. "It's not fair," he said. "She was all I had." His voice cracked on the last word, and before I could respond, he dropped his pencil, pressing the heels of his hands against his eyes as if trying to push back the tears. "Why did she have to leave?" he choked out. "What did I do wrong?" Those words shattered something inside me. I had been waiting for this moment, for the dam to break, for him to finally let out all the pain I knew he had been holding in. But knowing it was coming didn't make it any easier. I wanted to tell him it wasn't his fault, that he hadn't done anything wrong, that sometimes life is just cruel in ways we can't understand. But I knew words wouldn't be enough. Nothing I could say would bring Claire back. Nothing I said would take away the emptiness she had left behind. So I did the only thing I could. I reached across the table and pulled him into my arms. He didn't resist. His shoulders shook as he buried his face in my sweatshirt, his fingers gripping the fabric like it was the only thing keeping him from falling apart. "I'm here, Jack," I whispered. "You're not alone."
I didn't know how long we stayed like that.
Long enough for his sobs to quiet, for his breathing to slow. Long enough for my own tears to slip silently down my cheeks. From that moment on, I made a promise to myself. I would do everything I could to fill the void Claire had left behind. I went to every game, sat through every school recital, helped with every project, made sure he really knew, that he was loved. I cooked his favorite meals, even when I wasn't hungry. I stayed up late helping with homework, even when exhaustion clawed at my mind. I forced smiles on days when I felt just as lost as he did, because I needed him to believe that things would be okay, even if I wasn't sure they ever would be. But I wasn't Claire. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't be her. And maybe that's where the crack started. Because love isn't about replacing what's lost. It's about learning to live with the absence. And neither of us knew how to do that yet. Jack leaned on me for everything. It started with small things, picking out his clothes for picture day, declining invitations with a quiet shake of his head. "You're the only person I can talk to, and Evelyn," he told me one evening as we sat in my dimly lit living room, a half-eaten dinner forgotten on the table. "You actually listen." Hearing that sent a warmth through my chest, a validation I hadn't realized I needed. In a family fractured by loss, I had become Jack's anchor. I thought I was giving him something precious, stability, understanding, a refuge no one else could offer. But not everyone saw it that way. Curtis, my cousin, had always been one of the few family members who still checked in regularly. One afternoon over coffee, he finally voiced his concern. "You're doing an amazing job," he admitted, stirring his spoon absently in his mug. "But Jack needs to learn how to stand on his own. He's leaning on you for everything. That's not healthy for either of you." I bristled. Curtis didn't understand. He hadn't seen the nightmares, The nights Jack had woken up gasping for air, drenched in sweat, afraid to go back to sleep. He hadn't seen the way Jack's hands shook when he talked about the past, about the things he had lost. He didn't understand how much Jack needed me. Or maybe, just maybe, I didn't want to hear the truth. Looking back, I see it now. I see how much I needed Jack, too. Not just as a responsibility, but as a purpose. Taking care of him made me feel like I was making a difference. It filled a void I hadn't even acknowledged in myself. I wasn't just helping Jack, I was holding on to him too tightly. In my desperation to be there for him, I had become his lifeline. I had blurred lines that should never have been blurred. It wasn't obvious at first, but the cracks had started forming long before I noticed them. The way Jack hesitated before making even the simplest decisions, glancing at me as if seeking permission. The way he withdrew from others, his world narrowing until it contained only the two of us. The way he grew restless when I wasn't around, as if the ground beneath him was unsteady, without me there to hold him up. I should have seen it, but I didn't. And this is the story of how I broke that trust.